One of the unsettling things about my journey, mentally, physically, and emotionally, was that I wasn't sure when or where it was going to end. I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. I felt that I was starting over and over again. I was always on the move, always going somewhere. While we walked, I sometimes lagged behind, thinking about these things. To survive each passing day was my goal in life. At villages where we managed to find some happiness by being treated to food or fresh water, I knew that it was temporary and that we were only passing through. So I couldn't bring myself to be completely happy. It was much easier to be sad than to go back and forth between emotions. And this gave me the determination I needed to keep moving. I was never disappointed since I was always expected the worst to happen. There were nights when I couldn't sleep but stared into the darkest night until my eyes could see clearly through it. I thought about where my family was and whether they were alive. Deep voice as if someone were speaking through him. How many more times do we have to come to terms with death before we find safety? He asked. He waited a few minutes, but the three of us didn't say anything. He continued, every time people come at us with the intention of killing us, I close my eyes and wait for death. Even though I am still alive, I feel like each time I accept death, part of me dies. Very soon I will completely die, and all that will be left is my empty body walking with you. It will be quieter than I am. Sadhu blew on the palms of his hand to warm them and lay on the floor. His heavy breathing intensified, and I knew he had fallen asleep. Sadhu's family was unable to leave town during the attack. Along with his parents and three sisters who were 19, 17, and 15, he hid under the bed during the night. In the morning, the rebels broke into the house and found his parents and three sisters. Sadhu had climbed to the attic to bring down the remaining rice for their journey when the rebels stormed in. Sadhu sat in the attic, holding his breath and listening to the wailing of his sisters as the rebels raped them. His father shouted at them to stop. One of the rebels hit him with the butt of his gun. Sadhu's mother cried and apologized to her daughters for having brought them into this world to be victims of such madness. After the rebels had raped the sisters over and over, they bundled the family's property and made the father and mother carry it. They took the three girls with them. To this day, I carry the pain that my sisters and parents felt. When I climbed down after the rebels were gone, I couldn't stand and my tears froze in my eyes. I felt like my veins were being harshly pulled out of my body. I still feel like that all the time, as I can't stop thinking about that day. What did my sisters do to anyone? Sadhu said after he was done telling us the story one night in an abandoned village. My teeth became sour as I listened to his story. It was then that I understood why he was so quiet all the time. The fire had begun to die down, and I was running around the village looking for something I did not want to see. I hesitantly tried to make out the faces of burnt bodies, but it was impossible to tell who they had been. Besides, there were too many of them. They stayed in the house, Gazamu said to me as he pointed toward one of the charred houses. The fire had consumed all the door and window frames, and the mud that had been pushed in between the sticks was falling off, revealing the ropes through which the remaining fire was making its way. My entire body went into shock. Only my eyes moved, slowly opening and closing. I tried to shake my legs to get my blood flowing, but I fell to the ground, holding my face. On the ground, I felt as if my eyes were growing too big for their sockets. I could feel them expanding, and the pain released my body from the shock. I ran toward the house. Without any fear, I went inside and looked around the smoke-filled rooms. The floors were filled with heaps of ashes. No solid form of body was inside. I screamed at the top of my lungs and began to cry as loudly as I could, punching and kicking with all my might into the weak walls that continued to burn. I had lost my sense of touch. My hands and feet punched and kicked the burning walls, but I couldn't feel a thing. Gazumu and the rest of the other boys began pulling me away from the house. I kept kicking and punching as they dragged me out. I have looked around for them, but I can't see them anywhere, Gazumu said. I was sitting on the ground with my legs spread in the dirt, holding my head in my hands. I was filled up with anger. I hissed and boiled, and my heart felt as if it was going to explode. At the same time, I felt as if something had literally been placed on my head, heavier than I could ever imagine. My neck was beginning to ache. A group of more than 10 rebels walked into the village. They were laughing and giving each other high fives. 2 looked slightly older than me. They had blood on their clothes. One of them carried the head of a man, which he held by the hair. The head looked as if it was still feeling its hair being pulled. Blood dripped from where the neck had once been. The other rebel carried a gallon of gasoline and a big box of matches. The rebels sat on the ground and started playing cards, smoking marijuana, and boasting about what they had done that day. We burned about 3 villages today. One skinny guy, who was perhaps enjoying himself more than anyone else, laughed. Another rebel, the only one dressed in full army gear, agreed with him. Yes, 3 is impressive. In just a few hours in the afternoon. He paused, playing with the side of his G3 weapon. I especially enjoyed burning this village. We caught everyone here. No one escaped. That is how good it was. We carried out the command and executed everyone. Commander will be pleased when he gets here. He nodded, looking at the rest of the rebels who had stopped the game to listen to him. They all agreed with him, nodding their heads. They gave each other high fives and resumed their game. Some people escaped in the other 2 villages, the other rebel who was standing up said. He paused, rubbing his forehead as if pondering why that had happened, and then continued, they probably saw the smoke from this village and knew something was happening. We should change our strategy. Next time we must attack all the villages at the same time. The others didn't pay him as much attention. Of the room, clenching my teeth, I didn't want to show my friends the pain I felt from my headache. In my mind's eye, I would see sparks of flame, flashes of scenes I had witnessed, and the agonizing voices of children and women would come alive in my head. I cried quietly as my head beat like the clapper of a bell. Sometimes after the migraine had stopped, I was able to fall asleep briefly, only to be awoken by nightmares. And one night I dreamt that I was shot in the head. I was lying in my blood as people hurriedly walked past me. A dog came by and began licking my face ferociously. The dog bared its teeth as my blood sweetened its mouth. I wanted to scare it away, but I was unable to move. I woke up before it started what I was afraid it was going to do to me. I was sweating and couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. The lieutenant asked his men to gather everyone at the square. In the forest, there are men waiting to destroy all of our lives. We have fought them as best we can, but there are too many of them. They are all around the village. The lieutenant made a circle in the air with his hands. They won't give up until they capture this village. They want our food and ammunition. He paused and slowly continued. Some of you are here because they have killed your parents or families. Others because this is a safe place to be. Well, it is not that safe anymore. That is why we need strong men and boys to help us fight these guys so that we can keep this village safe. If you do not want to fight or help, that is fine. But you will not have rations and will not stay in this village. You are free to leave because we only want people here who can help cook, prepare ammunition, and fight. There are enough women to run the kitchen, so we need the help of able boys and men to fight these rebels. This is your time to revenge the deaths of your families and make sure more children do not lose their families. He took a deep breath. Tomorrow morning, you must all line up here, and we will select people for various tasks that we have to be carried out. He left the square, followed by his men. We stood in silence for a while and slowly started walking to our respective sleeping places. As the curfew was approaching, inside Juma, Al-Haji, Kanai, Moriba, Musa, and I quietly discussed what we were going to do. After the late breakfast, we lined up facing the corporal who handed us AK-47s. When it was my turn, he looked at me intensely as if he was trying to tell me that he was giving me something worth cherishing. He poked my chest with his finger and walked around me. When he came back to the front, he stared at me some more, his red eyes and dark face twitching. He bared his teeth as if he were preparing to attack, and my legs began to shake. When he started to smile, before I could smile with him, he had stopped, and the veins on his forehead stood up. Still looking straight at me, he reached into a wooden crate and pulled out the gun. He took out the magazine and handed me the AK with two hands. I hesitated for a bit, but he pushed the gun against my chest. With trembling hands, I took the gun, saluted him, and ran to the back of the line, still holding the gun, but afraid to look at it. I had never held the gun that long before, and it frightened me. The closest thing to it had been a toy gun made out of bamboo when I was 7. My playmates and I carved them and played war games in coffee farms and unfinished buildings at my grandmother's village. "Paw, paw," we would go, and whoever did it first would announce to the rest whom he had killed. Over and over in our training, he would say that same sentence. Visualize the enemy, the rebels who killed your parents, your family, and those who are responsible for everything that has happened to you. The sharp aches in my head, or what I later came to know as migraines, stopped as my daily activities were replaced with more soldierly things. In the daytime, instead of playing soccer in the village square, I took turns at the guarding posts around the village, smoking marijuana and sniffing brown, cocaine mixed with gunpowder, which was always spread out on the table, and of course taking more of the white capsules as I had become addicted to them. They gave me a lot of energy. The first time I took all these drugs at the same time, I began to perspire so much that I took off all my clothes. My body shook, my sight became blurred, and I lost my hearing for several minutes. I walked around the village aimlessly as I felt restless because I simultaneously felt a tremendous rush of energy and numbness. But after several doses of these drugs, all I felt was numbness to everything and so much energy that I couldn't sleep for weeks. We watched movies at night, war movies, Rambo, First Blood, Rambo 2, Commando, and so on, with the aid of a generator or sometimes a car battery. We all wanted to be like Rambo. We couldn't wait to implement his techniques. When we ran out of food, drugs, ammunition, and gasoline to watch war films, we raided rebel camps in towns, villages, and forests. We also attacked civilian villages to capture recruits and whatever else we could find. We have good news from our informants. We are moving out in 5 minutes to kill some rebels and take their supplies, which really belong to us, the lieutenant would announce. His face evinced confidence. His smiles disappeared before they were completed. We tied our heads with the green cloths that distinguished us from the rebels, and we boys led the way. There were no maps and no questions asked. We were simply told to follow the path until we received instructions on what to do next. We walked for long hours and stopped only to eat sardines and corned beef with gari, sniff cocaine, brown, and take some white capsules. The combination of these drugs gave us a lot of energy and made us fierce. The idea of death didn't cross my mind at all, and killing had become as easy as drinking water. My mind had not only snapped during the first killing, it had also stopped making remorseful records, or so it seemed. After we ate and did drugs, we would guard the perimeter while the adults rested for a while. I shared a post with Alhaji, and we would time each other on how fast we could take out a magazine and replace it. Stood at guard post passing out marijuana. Whenever I looked at rebels during raids, I got angrier because they looked like the rebels who played cards in the ruins of the village where I had lost my family. So when the lieutenant gave orders, I shot as many as I could, but I didn't feel better. After every gunfight, we would enter the rebel camp, killing those we had wounded. We would then search the houses and gather gallons of gasoline, enormous amounts of marijuana, cocaine, bales of clothes, crepes, shoes, watches, rice, dried fish, salt, gari, and many other things. We rounded up the civilians, men, women, boys, and young girls hiding in the huts and houses, and made them carry our loot back to the base. We, the lieutenant pointed to us, are here to protect you and will do all we can to make sure nothing happens to you. He pointed to the civilians. Our job is a serious one, and we have the most capable soldiers who will do anything to defend this country. We're not like the rebels, those riffraffs who kill people for no reason. We kill them for the good and betterment of this country. So respect all these men. He pointed to us again for offering their services. The lieutenant went on and on with his speech, which was a combination of instilling, I guess, fear in the civilians that we were doing right, what we were doing were right, and boosting the morale of his men, including us, the boys. I stood there holding my gun and felt special because I was part of something that took me seriously, and I was not running from anyone anymore. I had my gun now, and as the corporal always said, the gun is your source of power in these times. It will protect you and provide you all you need if you know how to use it well.